Hello, this is the final lesson on Spectre, the film marketing product. This is a addition to the lesson on industry, but it's purely about regulation within the industry part of the course. Because as you know, we have been studying Spectre for media language and representations. We always look at context, of course, and this particular product we look at for industries, which would appear on Section B of the Component 1 exam. Our learning objectives for this session are simply to develop an understanding of the role of the BBFC and to develop an understanding of the different classifications. So let's just very quickly have a look at how this fits into the exam. Regulation, if you didn't know, is the area of industry study which is about how films are awarded different classifications and certificates that determines who can see them at the cinema and buy them on DVD or Blu-ray based on their age. You will need to know about the BBFC, their purpose, the different age classifications and the differences between those classifications decided upon by the BBFC, and also be able to talk about the rating of our set product Spectre. So you might get questions in the industry section that look something like this. Name the organisation that rates the films in Britain. 12 and 12A are examples of age certificates in the UK. Give 2 other examples of age certificates in the UK. Explain the difference between the 12 and 12A certificates, and explain why a film may be given a 12A or a 12 certificate. Refer to Spectre to support your points. So we'll aim to answer all those questions and others that you might get asked. So, first things first, who are the BBFC? Well, they are the British Board of Film Classification. They are non-governmental, so they're not affiliated with the government. They are responsible for classifying films that are exhibited at cinemas and video works such as trailers, adverts, public information and campaigning films, menus, bonus content, etc., released on the physical media within the UK. So I think a lot of people think that the BBFC simply give out the age certificates to movies that arrive on the cinema, but they give everything to do with film that gets a certificate. That trailer that you saw on YouTube, that was given a certificate by the BBFC. When you go onto the director's commentary on a DVD, that gets a certificate from the BBFC. The little idents and menu items that you get on Blu-rays that go on a loop whilst you're making your selections as to what to watch, that gets a certificate from the BBFC. So it's more than just film. But why do they exist? What is the purpose? Well, their role is to protect vulnerable audiences, mostly younger audiences, from content that may be offensive or harmful, and to help audiences to make decisions according to personal choice regarding content that may harm or offend. And they do this, as I'm sure you know, by giving films a classification. There are 7 classifications in total. U for universal, P for parental guidance, 12A for 12 adult, 12, which is for video releases, 15, 18, and R18, which is usually saved for more adult entertainment, pornography and the like. So you might notice there's 2 of the categories look very, very close or similar to one another, the 12A and the 12. The 12A rating is only used for films shown in cinemas. Films rated 12A are suitable for children aged 12 and over. However, people younger than 12 may see a 12A so long as they are accompanied by an adult. In such circumstances, responsibility for allowing a child under 12 lies with the accompanying adult. The 12 rating is only found on videos and DVDs and Blu-rays. No one younger than 12 may rent a 12 rated video or DVD. We use exactly the same rules to rate films at 12A as we do to rate films or DVDs as 12. Okay. So why do you think that they've made this distinction then? Why split that? Why can't someone under 12 buy a film that they actually went to see at the cinema? Well, the BBFC gives their own reasons for this. They say the 12A requires an adult to accompany a child under 12 seeing a 12A film at the cinema. This is enforced by cinema staff, and a cinema may lose its licence if adult accompaniment is not enforced for children under 12 admitted to a 12A film. Accompanied viewing cannot be enforced in the home, so the 12 certificate remains for DVD, Blu-ray rather than the 12A. The 12 is also a simpler system for retailers. It means they cannot sell or rent an item unless the customer is aged over 12. So in other words, if you go to the cinema staff have to make sure that you have got an adult with you if you're under the age of 12 going to see a 12A. If you're in a shop, they can't necessarily guarantee that you've got an adult with you. Also, no one can guarantee that there is an adult watching with you at home. So you have to be at least 12 to buy the DVD of the same film, which kind of makes sense, I suppose. So we've got all these age ratings, these 7 different classifications. What do you think are the issues that the BBFC are concerned with when they're deciding what certificate to give a film? Okay, so why does a film get an 18 rather than a 15, or get given a 12 rather than a U? What are the different criteria or the different things that need to be considered about a movie? Well, there are 8 of these in total. I'm sure you had some of them on your list. See what you got right. Discrimination, drug use and abuse, imitable behaviour, language, swearing and the like, nudity, sexual content, threat, and I'm sure the one that you all had, violence. There's a couple on there that might not seem so obvious or not be clear what they mean. What do you think is meant by the term imitable behaviour and the term threat? Well, let's start with the second one first. The term threat is really, I think, used to be referred to by the BBFC as peril, but it's where the mood or the tone of the film creates a sense of tension and suspense where there is a real feeling of threat. You know, movies are a powerful medium for engaging with emotions, and you don't always have to show violence to imply violence. You don't always have to show horror to create horror. Some of the best films made were in an era before you could show any real sort of centre screen violence, and they were made using suspense and implication. Just look at some of the movies that Alfred Hitchcock made. Imitable behaviour just means behaviour that could be imitated. In other words, behaviour that people might copy, particularly younger audiences. So how do they come to making their decisions? Well, I could tell you all about it, but why not? Why not when we can watch a video about how the BBFC classifies and makes its decisions and what it deems to be appropriate for the British public. Make notes whilst you're watching so that you've got a really good knowledge of how they come to make their decisions.
Every film that's shown in the UK cinema has to be classified. The British Board of Film Classification and its examiners have to decide which certificate to award each film. In this programme, they explain how they take these difficult and sometimes controversial decisions.
I like to think that actually we reflect what society's moral standards are rather than being the moral arbiters ourselves. We have a set of guidelines that have been drawn up following consultation with over 11,000 people. Those people tell us what is acceptable, and we follow that. It's not the other way around. A lot of people think that we decide what is appropriate and tell the public that what they can watch. Actually, we reflect what the public tell us is acceptable.
The board is based in Soho, in central London. Its 30 examiners come from all walks of life, but they have one thing in common.
We're pretty much all film buffs. You have to have a pretty thorough grounding in film and definitely an interest in film in order to apply for this job. When we came for our interviews, the first interview is kind of a pub quiz, basically, on film and television, of course, because we do loads of DVDs and things.
We watch films, we record issues in those films. We look for things like violence, sex, bad language, and using our set of guidelines, we judge what category a film or video work is most appropriately placed in.
There are 5 main categories: universal, suitable for all; parental guidance, where some scenes may be unsuitable for young children. 12A, under 12s may watch these if accompanied by an adult. 15, suitable for 15 years and over. And 18, for adults only. Deciding whether a film should be a 12A or a 15 can be tricky. Under 15s are allowed to watch a 15 film at home. Many feel they should also be allowed to watch these in the cinema.
15 might be like a better film than a 12, and if you're 14, you don't really want to see like a 12 film because it might not be as good.
Some things are really silly, like some games and stuff. It's just like, why is it a 15? There's nothing in it that's different to what I would have seen when I was 14.
Yeah, I think very often they are wrongly classified because sometimes you can get a film which hasn't got that much violence or that much wrong with it, and it's classified more than a film which I personally would not like to watch.
The board says it regularly consults the public. Films are classified according to 4 main issues: sex and nudity, taste and decency, bad language, and most importantly, violence.
What the general public in the UK tell us is that they are concerned about extreme images of violence being shown to children because of the potential for imitability, for the potential for psychological damage to children.
The password, please. I've got a little itch down there.
There should be no concentration on blood and injuries at 12. So violence is more impressionistic, should we say. So in Casino Royale, for instance, there were some strong moments in Casino Royale. There was a famous torture scene where James Bond is being tortured. You know what's going on, but you don't actually see any strong detail. You don't see the blows landing on a particular part of his body that's being whipped with a rope. You just know it's happening, and it's kind of below screen. It's very unpleasant knowing what's happening, but you don't actually see it. If you to see it, it would undoubtedly have pushed it up to at least 15.
Yes! 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 Yes!
Casino Royale, there is plenty of sort of let up from the violence. There are the scenes in the casinos, there's the love scenes, there's the bits where they're jumping around on cranes and not sort of particularly inflicting any violence. Whereas in Die Hard, it is very much going from one violent scene to the next violent scene.
As fast as you can. Hey! Jesus!
The scene where the Bruce Willis character fights against a female assassin, and it's quite a strong scene. It goes on for a long time. He throws her against bookcases. There's one point where he sort of grabs a handful of her hair. And there's a lot of really strong sound effects as she's sort of thrown against the walls and stuff like that.
Okay, how much time do you need? Not much.
There's an awful lot of violence in it, and despite the humour, we felt that there was just too much for it to be able to be accommodated at 12A.
In my village, when you steal the wife of an elder, they take you to a tree and they hang you by your skin.
The Last King of Scotland is different in that it purports to depict real events. Certainly, Idi Amin was a real person. He was known to have murdered many, many thousands, possibly more, of his own countrymen. The rather grotesque scene where a young guy played by James McAvoy has hooks inserted into his chest. Very strong scene. The exact moment of piercing the flesh is not shown. You think it is, but it is not actually shown.
It is a very vicious torture scene. It goes on for a long time. He's clearly in a huge amount of pain. There's none of the, in Casino Royale, Bond is sort of responding flippantly to his torturer, you know, almost encouraging him to carry on and torture him. There is none of that in Last King of Scotland. It's very realistic. You see bloody detail. you see him being hoisted up, it's very sort of protracted and callous. And I mean, that's one of the things that sort of pushes that film towards the higher end of the 15 category.
It's very difficult to speculate on how far they'd have had to have gone to have made it an 18. The context there is very different to the kind of torture that one sees, for instance, in such films as Hostel and Saw, where the rather grotesque injuries inflicted upon the characters are done purely for the sake of sadism.
You could have a completely naked person just walking around at U and PG, but as soon as any sexual elements become involved, then you're talking about higher categories. And I'd say at 12, you could probably see maybe a bit of boob, a bit of bum in a sex scene. You're more likely just to see head and shoulders of people under the blankets, a sort of a very brief establishing shot that there is sexual activity going on without any actual sexual activity. At 15, it gets stronger. You could see sort of full body nudity at 15. And then if there's full body nudity and some sort of writhing around and things, then it's more likely to get to 18.
The last thing I need is another picture of me looking like a porcelain doll. As a paying customer.
There is no sex in Titanic. However, there is one scene of nudity when Kate Winslet's character goes into the room occupied by Leonardo DiCaprio's character and undresses and asks him to draw her portrait. If you strip away every other issue in Titanic which contributed to the classification, that scene on its own would have been enough to make it a 12A because of the sexualisation of the nudity.
A lot of people who saw the film and complained about that scene felt that it was gratuitous, that it didn't need to be there in the film. We felt that it was quite a good scene in sort of establishing the relationship between the two, that there was something deeper than just this sort of a vague flirtation on board a ship.
Robbie. Cecilia. I love you. I love you.
Atonement is a very good example to use to contrast with what we've just spoken about in relation to Titanic, in that we do see some fairly graphic sex going on, although there's no nudity in the scene. Our guidelines say sexual activity may be implied. Clearly, this was more than implied, it was depicted, and that's the key difference here.
Someone's coming.
And that's what made that scene on its own a 15 marker for the film as a whole.
Lisa, you're the most amazing person I've ever met. It's only been a short time, but I think that I'm completely in love.
Team America is a really interesting one because our guidelines at 15 in terms of sex say sexual activity may be portrayed but without strong detail. And when you look at that scene, there's quite a lot of detail.
There's an emptiness I need to fill, and only one emptiness will do. Only a woman.
They don't have any genitals, they're just puppets, and so how is it possible for there to be any detail? So that was why we pumped for the 15 for that. We felt it sat fine at 15, that we would have looked a little censorious had we pushed that up to 18.
My profession, work as a television reporter for Kazakhstan. Please, you see.
When it came to Borat, we were very much aware that it was coming from a very sort of ironic point of view, that the maker of the film, Sacha Baron Cohen, is a very well-known figure, and he's a very well-known Jewish figure, and the fact that a lot of the humour in there could have been taken as anti-Semitic, the fact that it was made by a Jewish filmmaker almost mitigated that fact, and we felt that at 15 the audience was aware that the context was, at 15 the audience would be aware of the concept of irony and would be aware that actually these things were not meant to be taken seriously.
The main issue that we had to think about, though, was the scene near the beginning of the film, the so-called running of the Jew. where you see these grotesque caricatures of Jewish people, almost sort of harking back to the kind of images that one used to see in Nazi Germany, being chased through the streets of Kazakhstan. This was clearly not intended to be a stereotypical image of Jewish people or to be offensive to Jews. Rather, it was sending up the bigotry of many of these East European countries where anti-Semitism is still absolutely rife. The British public find strong language, the F word and the C word in particular, to be very, very offensive, and they tell us that they don't want young children hearing this language.
For Weddings and Funerals, it's a sort of classic example of something jumping straight into a category within the opening minutes.
Right.
Hugh Grant and Charlotte Coleman say numerous uses of the F word. It was one of those films where you're sort of sat in the examining room laughing about it because it immediately becomes a 15 because there's so many uses in the opening scene.
It used to be the case that more than one use of the F word would take a film out of 12A. That isn't the case anymore. Although we do record the numbers and frequency of swearing in a film, it's no longer the paramount reason behind the decision. Context is everything.
For the British Board of Film Classification, the key is public opinion. Bad language in films has become more acceptable, and the board has changed its guidelines to take this into account. If attitudes to violence or sex and nudity change, those guidelines will be altered as well.
Really nice insight there into how the BBFC operates and how it makes its decisions, of course, and how they evolve over time as well, how the classification system reflects the I suppose the ideologies of a society. What once was a 15 may now be a 12 because our attitudes towards things shift and shape over time. However, there are obviously guidelines at any moment in time, and you need to know what they are. So there is a grid with all the different types of issue that the BBFC look at and what each certificate can find acceptable in that film. The grid is partially completed. You can fill in the rest. Now, a really nice part of the BBFC website is that it allows you to have a go at being an examiner. It's actually the BBFC, which is a website that is trying to encourage younger people to engage with what they're doing. It's a good way of showing and understanding the processes that the examination team use. So have a go yourself. Visit the website, choose one of the trailers and then follow the instructions. They ask you to consider a number of different aspects from watching the trailer, as well as other issues as well. Don't forget though, trailers often get higher ratings than the film as a whole, as audiences don't get any choice over which trailers they see in the cinema, and some issues cannot be put into context in such a short time of frame for the trailer. So consider that when you're having a go. All of which brings us to our set product. The BBFC has a part of its website called Insight, and the information on there gives us a lot of useful information about why our set product Spectre was classified as a 12A and 12. Have a read of it. Do you agree with the BBFC classification of Spectre? Look at the criteria for the 12A. In these scenes from the movie, does this push the boundaries? Should it maybe be moved up to a 15? Some people certainly thought so. And whilst the video I showed you talked about how Casino Royale, the first Daniel Craig James Bond film, had some quite graphic violence, but managed to stay as a 12A. This report from The Guardian suggests that it was one of the most complained about films in the year it was released in 2015. Have a read of the article and also have a look at the notes you made when you were watching Spectre. You were asked to keep some specific notes on certain aspects of the film. Well, do you agree? Do you agree with the article and the things that people have said? Finally then, this is a short part of the classification report given by the BBFC. Columbia, who were the one of the companies involved in distribution, Columbia submitted Spectre to the BBFC in August 2015 for advice on whether it was likely to meet the BBFC guidelines criteria for 12A. At this stage, the film had no title sequence, end credits were missing, and some special effects work was unfinished. But the senior compliance officers, then senior examiners, who viewed it, noted that it was largely complete. The BBFC advised that a 15 rating seemed the most probable outcome, citing strong bloody detail during a scene of eye gouging and further bloody detail in the aftermath of the suicide of a terminally ill man. The distributor chose to reduce or remove elements of these scenes. BBFC staff viewed a re-edited version and advised that, now without the strong bloody detail, the film was likely to be classified at 12A. So why did they go through these changes? I mean, the director had put them in for a reason. He obviously felt that it served the story and the characters. So why would the distributor want a 12A rating rather than a 15 certificate? So, of course, the main answer to that is to reach a greater audience. Bond films have always had an audience of adults. They've had an audience that have grown up with the films, but they're always trying to encourage younger audiences as well. At the end of the day, these are high-octane action movies. They're thrilling suspense and big-budget mainstream action films. And of course, the sooner you get an audience interested and involved, the more they are likely to stay with the franchise. Seeing the film has moved to a 15 certificate might put some audiences off, and it obviously reduces the amount of money you can earn at the box office because less people will go and see it. Last couple of things. First of all, remember, and this is a common mistake that's made by people, is that people often accuse the BBFC of censoring or cutting or banning films. They have no such powers. The BBFC do not cut films. What they do is they suggest what needs to be cut to gain a particular certificate, and the distributor will then make the necessary cuts. So the example above is perfect to illustrate that. They didn't cut the scenes from the movie to make it a 12A. They just said, if you don't cut those scenes, you'll get a 15. And so the producers, the distributors, decided to cut the scenes. So you've got an overview there of how the BBFC works, why Spectre got the rating it did, and how to go at being an examiner yourself. So from what you've seen and read of the BBFC and film regulation in the UK, do you think it's a fair system? It's very different in America, but that's another story. Do you think that the UK system could be improved? Do you think that it works? Do you think that it's fair? And that's all there is for regulation. It is part of industry, but you might get a set of questions that are specifically about it, and that's why you need to know. Thanks very much. Ta-ta for now.